Hey there, seventh graders. How you doing? This is Mr. Garnett Cook. Hope you had a good week and are having a good weekend. Next week's work is going to focus on the transition to Greece's classical period, and more specifically, the rise of the Greek city-states. So last week you learned about Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations, and after those two civilizations collapsed, Greece went through this period that's commonly referred to as a dark age. And a dark age means simply that it's a time period during which few written records, if any, survive. But around the, I would guess, 8th, 7th century, 6th century BCE, a little bit earlier than that, Greece would come out of its dark age. And what is clear by, and it's actually more the 8th century, is that Greece's first independent city states are clearly in existence. And we're going to be learning next week more closely about two of them, Athens and Sparta. But this is a time period where we see several independent autonomous cities popping up across Greece. And one of the things you're going to be learning about this week is why they developed the way that they developed and what these city states were all about and what kinds of government governed the different city states of Greece. It's important to point out that there was never a period where there was a unified Greek people, with a couple of exceptions. The Greeks will unify for the most part when the Persian Empire tries to invade Greece. We'll be learning about that also next week. And then much later on, when the Macedonians conquer most of the Greek city states and unify them under the rule first of a guy named Philip II, and then more famously his son Alexander the Great. What I want to do today is just do a quick introduction to the city states and also preview systems of government in the Greek city states, because those are both things you're going to be learning about this week for your independent work. So let's start with the city state. The Greek word for city state is the word polis, Polis. And you may recognize the word polis in a number of words that exist today, one being the word police, which is the sort of law enforcement of a city. Another is the word metropolis with the Polis on the end. That means like a very big city. And even the word politician and politics comes from the word polis. Um, anyway, the polis simply means city state of ancient Greece. What I want to just do really broadly and generally is tell you some of the features of Greek city states using our little map of Athens over here as a model for what I'm talking about. First thing is, city states were of differing sizes. Some were big. For instance, Athens was a very big city state. Others were much smaller, and it depended upon geography, the landscape in which the city state developed. They were typically ruled by people of wealth and nobility. Even when we get to the rise of democracy in Athens, for example, it is still a city that is predominantly ruled by wealthy elites. There were a couple of key features of city states that were common among the city states. There are examples of them here on the map. One is what is called the agora. And you see this is a map of Athens in the 5th century, and this is the agora down here. The agora was basically a huge outdoor public commercial center, kind of like an ancient shopping mall, for lack of a better way to describe it. That's where the people would gather and do business. And then city states also had the Acropolis, which is the citadel atop the high hill overlooking the city. And this was a place both of worship, but also in times of crisis, a place where the citizens of the city state could retreat to as protection. Anyway, so those are a couple of the common features of city states. One of the things that we're going to talk a little bit more deeply about, especially when we talk about Athens, is something which would distinguish ancient Greece from other ancient civilizations. And that was the rise of what we call the citizen. If you learn about the ancient world, for the most part, whether you're talking about Egypt or you're talking about China or you're talking about Mesopotamia, these were places that were ruled by monarchs, by emperors, by pharaohs, by kings and queens. And the people who lived in those places were subjects. They didn't have any rights or political power of their own. What starts to emerge in the Greek city states, and it's most dramatic in Athens, is the rise of the concept of a citizen, that a person living in that city state was no longer simply a subject of a king, a queen, a pharaoh, that they were people who had rights and political power. And this is going to be something that will spread across Greece between, say, the 7th century and the 5th century BCE. What could citizens do? They could vote. They could hold public offices. They could own property of their own. And this is something that we'll come back to with the Romans, they could serve as citizen soldiers. And perhaps no city state was this more an important feature than Sparta, which we will also learn about a little bit more next week. One of the privileges really of being a citizen of a city state is the being able to serve in defense of that city state in a time of war. So this was some of the features of Greek city states, and we'll be talking especially about citizenship a little bit more closely next week. One of the assignments you're going to have for this week is going to be focusing around major systems of government in Greece. One of the things that would set Greece apart from other places in the ancient world at the time was that there were a variety of different forms of government that governed the different city states. One, which we already know about, we've learned most about in other civilizations this year, is monarchy. The various city states were monarchies. Monarchy takes us back to the Minoans and Mycenaeans. But even like Sparta and Athens and other city states in Greece later on would have some elements of monarchy, rule of a king uh, for a period of time. But there were other systems of government in Greece as well. Another one you're going to be learning about is what is known as oligarchy. An oligarchy is a system of government where a small elite group of people rule over the city state. The most famous example of that in Greece was Sparta, but they were not the only oligarchy that ruled over Greek city states. In fact, at one point, Athens was ruled by an oligarchy. You also have what is called tyranny, which is ruled by a dictator. When we get into a little bit of the history of Athens next week, we'll learn a little bit more about the Athenian tyrants. Tyrants were people who usually led or a revolt against ruling elites and basically installed themselves as rulers and created new laws that were designed to be, in some cases, fair to the people, but not in every case. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And then finally, and this is the Greek innovation, democracy, the rule of the people. And Athens will be the place where democracy is most widely practiced for the first time. Athens will set up a system where Athenian citizens are given political power. And it will be, for example, in Athens, you will have assemblies that will come together, and the citizens will actually get to vote on the passing of law. And this is what we call a democratic system. So the Greeks are going to be ruled by different types of government at different times. For this week's assignments, you're going to learn a little bit more about city-states, how they came into being, how geography influenced the rise of the city-states. You're also going to be learning a little bit more about these different systems of government that govern the city-states of Greece at various times in its history. So that's going to be the focus of this week's work. If you have any questions for me, you can shoot me an email during the course of the week. I'll be happy to answer. And next week, we'll be getting into a little bit more closely Athens and Sparta, the two most powerful city-states of Greece. And we might even next week get into the first conflict that we're going to be learning about, major war with the Persian Empire. And we'll be getting into that a little bit more next week as well. Take care.